Howdy folks, hope you're all having a good one, and welcome back to World of Tanks with the mighty Jingles. It's been a while since we did World of Tanks. The good news apparently is that the incredibly contentious Crew 2.0 or Screw You 2.0 system, which the community have been calling it, has not been shelved. But due to massive negative community response, it's been postponed at least 6 months, while Wargaming figure out a way to make it happen, without it being too incredibly obvious that they're just trying to hit everybody's wallets as hard as they possibly can. So, in the meantime, let's give World of Tanks another crack of the whip. This is Boz Kiki. He's in the newish Skoda T-56. This is a premium Tier 8 heavy tank. If you're wondering if it's worth the money, the simple answer to that is no. This thing sells for 10,550 gold. For that price you could buy yourself a copy of Aliens Fireteam Elite and an entire new game for the price of one Tier 8 premium tank. Any game that expects you to hand over the cost of a full price PC game for one tank in a game that features hundreds of tanks is obviously not worth it. Still, it's at least going to be cheaper than the Tier 9 premiums, which, yep, World of Tanks is going there. But regardless of how good or bad the tank is, it is never worth the money that Wargaming are expecting you to hand over for it. Bearing that in mind though, what is the T-56 actually like? Well, it could have been like anything, because it's a tank that never actually existed, so they can do pretty much what they want with it. I mean, I say it never existed, and that's technically true because not so much as a prototype was ever built, but studies were done. So I can't speak about the historical accuracy of this tank design. Although it's not fair at this point really to criticise Wargaming for coming up with fantasy tank after fantasy tank, because when the game's been in development as long as this and features as many tanks as it already does, there aren't that many real tanks left that they can model and put into the game. Bearing all that in mind though, you can see that the gun depression at least isn't terrible. It has 8 degrees, which is very useful on positions like that piece of rubble that Boz was taking cover behind, because it allows him to still keep his gun sight on target while angling up his relatively weak upper frontal plate and turning it into an auto ricochet zone, so that's good. The turret is also pretty nice, which is what you'd expect of Soviet-inspired tank designs, which this is. It boasts 220mm of armour, but more importantly, it's all nicely rounded and sloped, offering increased chances that any shells that hit are going to just ricochet off harmlessly. As far as mobility is concerned, it's not great. Okay, it's actually pretty bad. The tank has a low power to weight ratio and a top speed of only 35 km per hour. Actually, let's just stop and consider what I said there. It only has a top speed, a heavy tank only has a top speed of 35 km per hour. Can we just stop and consider the amount of power creep that's happened in World of Tanks over the last 7 years? That we've gotten to the point where I'm saying a heavy tank that can only do 35 km per hour has bad mobility. What a time to be alive. But yeah, in the current World of Tanks game environment, 35 km per hour for a heavy tank is on the slow side, so that's that. The gun, however, is good and bad. It's a 2-shot autoloader, and this gun features the second highest alpha damage of any Tier 8 tank in the game, in a 2-shot autoloader, which has a fairly quick intra-clip reload, which means this tank has the unusual distinction of being an autoloader whose DPM doesn't actually suck. Because the thing with autoloaders tends to be, and yep, French tanks, I'm looking at you here, is that the DPM, the damage per minute, is never good, because of the extreme time that it takes to refill the magazine and get the autoloader fully loaded, during which time you can't attack anything. The plus side is, of course, that the burst damage tends to be incredibly high. That's the trade-off. But because this is only a 2-shot autoloader, with a 460 average damage shell, it kind of gets the best of both worlds. The short reload on the 2-shot magazine keeps the damage per minute up to acceptable standards, and the 1-2 punch of twin 130mm 460 average damage shells ensures that it's also capable of doing a respectable bit of burst damage. That's the good news about the gun. The penetration of the 130mm shells is nothing special, but it's certainly not bad with 208mm of penetration at tier 8. Of course, if you're a complete tryhard, or you're getting tier 10 matchmaking, you can always put your hand in your pocket, roll your face all over the 2 key, and suddenly enjoy the same levels of penetration as are typically enjoyed by tier 10 medium tanks, with 248mm of penetration using the gold ammunition. And judging by the length of time that this tank has been out, is probably something that people are finding that they're having to do more often than not, because that's what tends to happen when Wargaming release a new premium tank. Everyone goes on at the forums to complain about how overpowered the tank is, because you're doing 5,000 damage per match in this brand new tier 8 premium heavy tank. Well, yes, that's because you're always top tier, because that's how the matchmaker works. Every time Wargaming release a new premium tank, they ensure that it gets positive matchmaking in order to generate positive word-of-mouth reviews of the tank so that more people rush out and spend money on it. And it's only after the initial sales burst has died down that the tank starts getting its proper matchmaking and starts getting into tier 10 battles as much as it used to get into tier 8 battles. And then suddenly everybody realises that the tank isn't quite as good as they may have at first believed. This, of course, is why if you absolutely must spend the cost of a brand new full price PC game on a new tank in World of Tanks, you should always wait for at least a month until after the tank has initially gone on sale before putting your hand in pocket, so you can see how the tone of the tank reviews change once the initial sales rush is over and people start experiencing the actual matchmaking that the tank should have been having all along. It is your money, spend it wisely. Oh, and I almost forgot. Having that 2-shot autoloader is very, very good, and it's probably the most defining feature of the tank as a whole. But you kind of have to get relatively close to make it work, or be in a nice, completely hold-down position if possible, but on a reverse slope if not, in order to increase the angle of impact on that relatively thin upper frontal plate, which is only 100mm thick. And the reason why you're going to want to get in pretty close is because it has horrible accuracy of 0.42 and an atrociously bad aiming time of an entire 3 seconds. Generally speaking, the gun handling as a whole is pretty terrible. Oh, and the other bad thing about the gun, well, it's not strictly the gun itself, but it's the amount of ammunition that this tank can carry. It only has 30 rounds of ammunition. It's not unusual to find yourself doing extremely well in this machine, and then in the heat of battle you pull the trigger and the gun goes click. It suffers from exactly the same problems as the French autoloaders like the Batchat 25T, which also only carries 30 rounds of ammunition and is notorious for running dry before the end of the battle. However, while this is a problem, it's not as big a problem for the T-56 as it is for the Batchat 25T, because one's tier 8 and the other one is tier 10. And when both tanks are top tier, which is always going to happen for the Batchat, obviously it is tier 10. But the Batchat is always going to be looking at a tier 10 enemy team, with tanks that have a lot more health than the T-56 is likely to be facing most of the time. Add to that the fact that while they both carry the same 30 rounds of ammunition, the ammunition fired by the Batchat does 390 average damage and the ammunition fired by the T-56 does 460 average damage. So, yeah. Still going to be an issue for the T-56, but not as big an issue comparatively speaking. Check out this extremely brave move from the Object 416. He has 635 health and he's managed to drive into an obstacle while attempting to make his escape, and he's facing a tank with a 2-shot, 920 average damage between them autoloader, and the only reason he got out of that intact without dying was because the T-28 prototype up there was backstopping him, and Boz didn't want to risk taking any unnecessary damage, and why should he? Because all he has to do is drive around here and then kill the Object 416. And while it's true that his mobility does kind of suck, it's at least better than that of a T-28 prototype, who is always going to lose a game of chasey chasey, catchy catchy, kissy kissy with a T-56. Now, is he paying attention to the map, and does he realise that Boz is about to give him a dose of extremely rough and unwelcome surprise butt sex? Or is he going to be tempted by the friendly VK? Because if he's paying attention to the map, he must know that Boz is sneaking around behind him. Not that it really... No, he wasn't paying attention to the map. And he doesn't seem to have realised that Boz does in fact have a two-shot autoloader. Oh well. Never mind. So, Boz Kicky, thoroughly enjoying, it has to be said, the what was at the time brand new Skoda T-56 Premium Tier 8 heavy tank. For at least as long as it took for Wargaming to realise that everybody who was ever going to buy a copy of this tank has already bought one, at which point they'd put the matchmaking back to what Tier 8 tanks normally enjoy, facing Tier 10s, 2 games out of every 3. Boz, thank you for sending that one in. I sincerely hope you enjoyed this tank while it was still enjoying the honeymoon period, and I equally sincerely hope that you are still enjoying it now, although I strongly suspect you probably aren't, for all the reasons that I've already covered. Nevertheless, well done on this early victory in the T-56. Everybody else, I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, take care, stay safe, and I'll catch you next time.